Everyone achieves their own sense of nirvana somehow. And I've found that while I write, it's almost a form of meditation for me, in that I enter entirely into my own world, where nothing outside seems to bother me, nothing can get in, and I enter a state that I suppose you could liken it to a blissful state, that I'm entirely within my own universe, within its own confines. I'm in complete control of it. So I suppose I could get out a sense of fulfillment when I'm writing. I don't think I have any sort of epiphany when this is happening. But what does happen is that I get a sense of inner peace, basically. That I think as time passes, we're approaching a tipping point. Right? Now, while I don't necessarily subscribe to a lot of New Age mantras, because I just don't, simple as that, I think they're nonsense, quite frankly. But I think more and more people are becoming spiritually attuned and spiritually aware. That I do believe there is a tipping point coming, that I'm not talking anything like the age of Aquarius is almost on us, nothing like that, nothing as grand as that. But I think there is a sense of spiritual awareness coming upon us that will tip the world a slightly different way, but not for all people. I think this will only come within a certain few. I think people are questioning the path to their own enlightenment more than they ever were. I was brought up a Christian, I was baptised in the church and all the rest of it and brought into it. But what I found was that the church wasn't enough anymore, up to after a certain point. I don't think any of the monotheistic faiths have any stranglehold on what is true and what is not. I don't think any of the polytheistic faiths either have any stranglehold on truth. Truth comes from within, and anyone that sets themselves up to be some sort of guru or messiah is, I think, sadly deluded, or they're on some sort of immense power trip. So I think the road to salvation is within each and every one of us, and we don't necessarily need someone conducting the band to get there. Roslyn Chapel, I think, should really be viewed as an entity in its own right. It depends where you get your information on whether you believe there is a link between the Gnostics and the Templars and Uncle Tom Cobley and all to Roslyn Chapel, quite frankly. You've already got an organisation that holds its meetings within Roslyn Chapel, which is the Militia Temple Scotia, which is another organisation styling itself on the precepts of the Knights Templar. Now, The Boys Brigade, if they wished, could set themselves up in Roslyn Chapel. All you do is spend your money, because Roslyn Chapel will take the money off anyone who wants to hold meetings in there. The Edinburgh Festival holds concerts in it with exactly the same premise. It pays its money, it makes its choice. I tend to think that the Roslyn trustees would allow anyone in it, providing they weren't wearing pointed hats with lunar symbols on them and black cloaks and riding on broomsticks. So long you weren't overtly occult, they would be quite happy to let anyone perform their rituals inside Roslyn Chapel. But the chapel itself is a storehouse, I think, of spiritual power. It's a nexus of earth energy, and as I have found out through hard experimentation, there is an operable portal between this world and the next inside that chapel. But it was built by Sir William Sinclair, who was the third and last Prince of Orkney, a very well respected member of Scottish society in their time. The Sinclairs obviously were very well thought of by royalty in their day. Some people say it was intended to be the retrochoir for a cathedral, and at the west end of the chapel can be seen the transepts of what would have been that cathedral. They ran out of either money or inclination or whatever, and it was stopped. However, people like Lomas and Knight in the Hiram Key and in the Second Messiah insist that the chapel itself is intended to be a replica of Solomon's Temple. They tell us, and they will produce diagrams to the effect that this is exactly an overlay of the temple when placed upon an overlay of Roslyn Chapel is identical. Strangely enough, one of the choirs in Glasgow Cathedral also carries the same design, so I don't think it's all that unique. But what I think is that Roslyn Chapel is an immensely powerful storehouse of energy. I can tell you that when I first went there in the early 1990s, that the impression that I had when I walked through the door was of immense latent power. By that I mean a spiritual power. The nearest I can come to this, and I hope that the people that are watching this can relate to it, was that I visited Jesus' birthplace in Bethlehem, and the impression was exactly the same. You walk down into this catacomb, which is almost what it is like, and there were people prostrating themselves. The place is quite dark. It's lined with icons, religious icons, and people were in tears, not hysterical, but so wound up with the passion of their belief in this place. And Roslyn almost had that feeling inside it. Now, what I've found out since then, we've been in Roslyn many times over the years carrying out our experiments. Once, the two key experiments were in 1998 and in 2005. And I've found that each time we've returned to the chapel, with the number of people that the Da Vinci Code induced to go into the chapel, it's almost as if each of them has taken with them a little bit of that power has gone with them. And they've imprinted the chapel with their own templates, whether it be of ignorance or greed or whatever, but they've taken that power from the chapel. Now, while there is still a secret within the chapel, I think it has now just become another building, whereas 10-15 years ago it wasn't just another building. It was a powerhouse of spirit, it was a powerful place, it was a marvellous place, and now a lot of it's gone, and I really think it would need to be left alone for another 500 years to recharge, or like a battery. Roslyn Chapel was built upon an area that was a noted place of healing from the word go. It was built upon, it is believed, a temple to Mithras. It was also a site, I believe, of Celtic Christianity. And I think the chapel was built in such proportions that it would take and harmonise that energy. I think it would amplify. It was acting almost as an amplifier, a stone-built amplifier. It's a nexus, or nexi, should I say, of two different sets of ley lines. One is on one of the side entrances. It's at maybe about 10-15 metres from the side entrance, and there is another supposed nexus of ley lines down in the crypt in what is currently a storeroom, and what it is being used for just now is a small display area for carved stones. I've stood on a flagstone in there in 1998, and I was asked what I felt, and what I felt was the floor move under me like a rubber sheet. It was like standing on the deck of a ship moving in a heavy sea. But I was told that many people get that experience on that slabstone because it is a nexus of ley lines within that area. Now, whether that counts as telluric energy, I'm not sure. I've been going to the chapel since 1992, which, to be quite honest, that's the first time I'd ever actually heard about the place. I had no idea Roslyn Chapel existed till 1992, which is just after a return from working in Saudi Arabia. And we took with us, as an experiment, if you will, we took with us two sets of mediums. There were two husbands and wives, and we took them along, and I went with one and a colleague went with the other. And we walked around the chapel, and basically we're just trying to get their impressions of the place. Now, one of the first impressions that came out from the couple that I was walking with was that the chapel was not temporally stable. In other words, it existed 99.9% here and 0.1% elsewhere, which is quite a shock. In fact, the psychic involved said if you could set up a camera looking at the windows 24/7, she said that the little paintings in the stained glass, you would see a blade of grass would appear and disappear, a flower would bloom and die, and that the chapel is actually moving in time, not in this time, but 0.1% in another time. They both located one particular spot within the chapel, which is at the east end. In fact, it's at the northeast end of the chapel, in the Lady Chapel, I might add, where they found an area that very strange. They said there was something very strange about this area. One described it as a shimmering curtain of light with little sparkles. The other one described it as a violet pillar of light rising up through the floor, exactly in the same spot. Now, I spoke to them both independently. They had no way of corroborating this between one another, but both are picking up this particular area as something different, something special. I was asked, would I like to experience this energy? So I stood with my back to the St Matthew altar, because Roslyn Chapel, as you probably know, is also the Collegiate Church of St Matthew, to give it its Sunday name. I stood with my back to this altar and closed my eyes, and I had this in videotape as well. I was getting this videotaped as well, which was probably a good idea. And something was happening in front of me. I couldn't see what it was because my eyes were shut at the medium's request. The next thing I knew, I couldn't keep my arms at my side. My arms started floating up from my side. I literally could not hold them down. They started floating up. Something was rising from the floor and I was coming up with it. The next thing I realised was that it was impression like having a jack under my heels, like a car jack under my heels. I couldn't stand still. I couldn't stand up. I kept tilting forward, and the harder I went back, the more the pressure was coming up, the floor lifting me up, and eventually I literally came off the floor. It wasn't feet off the floor, maybe half an inch. I actually lifted from the floor, fell forward, and the medium in front of me sort of caught me. I was absolutely amazed, I was completely astounded. I hadn't a clue what had happened, but I knew something very special had happened. So I gave my wife a call. She came across and I said, look, stand there, what do you find? And she stood there and she hadn't a clue what had been happening. Otherwise, I think she'd been standing somewhere in the church watching me, doing something down there. And as soon as she stood in this spot, her arms started floating up from her sides. She too could feel this. Now, we both felt this sensation. Then the medium did something, whatever it was she did, and shut it down. She stopped it. But the other thing was that the other medium, towards the end of our stay in Roslyn Chapel on that day in 1998, the other medium, we were all standing, again it was on the videotape, and she started talking or speaking to someone who she said was trying to come through this veil, this sparkling veil. She could see the hands coming through, she could see the faces on the other side. They wanted to be brought through to this side of reality, from their side to us, and she just wouldn't do it. She started to break down, to become extremely emotional, and she eventually asked me to turn off the camera altogether, which I did out of respect for her. I did not leave it there. I was able to carry on my own investigations into the chapel. And now I realised that within the chapel, at the east end, within the Lady Chapel, on the roof, in the ceiling of the chapel, there are hundreds and hundreds of stone cubes. The cubes are emanating from the musical instruments made in stone, being played by stone angels on the top of the pillars. Each face of each cube is different, and they run in a sequence in that the designs replicate as you follow them round. So it looked like some form of code, if you will. Now I know that the proprietor of the then proprietor of the Templar Lodge Hotel, that he assumed that these were musical notes, and he had hired a musicologist and a computer programmer in order to try and recreate what these notes actually were. Now, whether or not he was entirely successful in this, I really don't know, because I went on a slightly different track from this. His name was Stephen Pryor. Stephen Pryor was the name of the guy who did it. The result of this was that Stephen assumed that these notes formed what he called a healing cadence. Now, which is fair enough. I mean, I'm open to anything about that. But one thing I did realise was that the key to the secret of the chapel lay partly in the sequence of notes. Now, I also realised that if Sir William Sinclair had gone to the trouble of doing this, why would he have, if you like, hidden the secret in plain sight, and was there something else in this? It was then that I came across the concept of something called the augmented fourth of the Diabolus in Musica, as it was called then. Now, in medieval times, in fact it would predate the building of Roslyn Chapel, the Vatican proscribed the use of the augmented fourth in all music, not just church music, but music in Europe in general was prescribed to use augmented fourth. And if anyone has never heard an augmented fourth played, all you've got to do is listen to the Simpsons theme tune. You'll hear augmented fourths being played in there. The purpose of the augmented fourth was to induce a feeling of uneasiness or instability in the listener, and, if you like, introduce the devil into music. But what I think has been happening to the people who had heard the augmented fourth played inside chapels, I believe that the augmented fourth was inducing some of them to experience altered states of consciousness. Now, when they experience these altered states of consciousness, perhaps, just perhaps, they were experiencing God for themselves, if you like, some sort of spiritual revelation. Now, the church at that time would absolutely, and that would be anathema to the church. They were the sole arbiters of who or who would not experience spiritual revelations. It would be done by their authority, through their dogma, and by no other way. Therefore, to save the innocent, if you will, from unauthorised exploits and visions of God, they forbade it to be played anymore. On the other hand, they introduced something called the solfeggio frequencies. The solfeggio frequencies are noted within Gregorian chants. They induce feelings of well-being in both the singer and whoever is listening to them. So therefore the church pronounced this to be good. They were a good thing. Why would Sir William go to all the trouble of introducing this devil's chord? If Sir William was, as has been suggested, a member of the Knights Templar, he would probably have disapproved heartily of the proscription by the Catholic Church. So, I suggest that what he did was he thumbed his nose at the Church by introducing the augmented fourth, the devil's chord, into this music that's rising up in this majestic fashion up to heaven, and he hid it there as a deliberate slight to the Catholic Church. Now, as I said, it's no surprise and it's no great secret that there are musical notations hidden within the church. And indeed, music has been written which allegedly is a recreation of this music. Although, to me, it sounds like any other form of medieval music, quite frankly. But I don't think the music matters a hoot. What I think is important is the frequency of certain of the chords. So, what I did was, using a signal generator, a computer, and a set of speakers, I created several versions of augmented fourths notes. We got permission to enter the chapel, which we did in October 2005, and we recreated, using a laptop computer and a pair of speakers, we recreated the augmented fourths on their own. Now, present with us was a psychologist, there was a hypnotherapist, there was a musician who actually helped me develop the chords, and there were two of the psychics who were present in 1998 were also there. My wife, myself, and another researcher who was there just to help out and lift and lay, as indeed we all were, because nobody knew what was going to happen. In fact, if I remember correctly, that Stephen Pryor, when he was still alive, and that the man's been dead a number of years now, that Stephen Pryor said at the time, when he was promoting this idea, that when this note was going to be played, or when the music was going to be played, he'd be standing 2 miles up the road and watching with great interest, because he didn't want to be inside the chapel when it was going on, because nobody really knew what was going to happen. But the net result was that as soon as the computer kicked in and the music started to play, the frequency was being generated. And we only used one chord, I might add. We only had to use one. We didn't have time to use any of the rest. That the medium said, the doorway's just opened and it's opened wider. She stood with her back to the St. Matthew altar where the doorway is. I stood about a metre from her facing it. And between us, although it was chilly, because it was an October day and the chapel isn't heated particularly well, there was a column of cold air shooting up from the floor between us. There was a physical, something was there between us. It was a source of energy. I put my hand out to the right hand side, and it was like putting your hand out of a waterfall that's cold into warmth on the other side. There was a clearly defined shut-off point between the inside of the doorway and the outside of the doorway. And several of us tried that, and it seemed to be noted. The doorway would not open fully, and I started to wonder, was there another element in this? So, as it was, we ran out of time. We literally didn't have time to do anything else. We just had to shut out, grateful for what we had discovered, and then leave the place and just work away and try and develop the theories from there. A naturalised French American who lives in Connecticut, he dowsed the floor plan of Roslyn Chapel, and he came up with 4 distinct areas within the chapel where he said there are artefacts hidden in these 4 areas. 2 of them can be actually retrieved without doing a lot of very great, in fact maybe no physical damage to the chapel at all. Other 2 might not be so easily retrieved. He said that 2 of these artefacts were keys. Now, the odd thing he said was that these keys require coherent light to read them. Now, coherent light to me means laser light. Now, he also said the light would have to be red, coherent light, which means to me a ruby laser, which was one of the first types of laser that were ever produced, was a ruby laser. That kind of put the shutters up for me at first, because I'm thinking, ruby laser, red light? I don't think so. I'll need to go somewhere else with this. Within a week of getting this information, I then find that a source of red light has been located after being forgotten about for centuries in the east end of Roslyn Chapel. Above the window, the circular window which is in the east end of Roslyn Chapel, there is a light box, which is a mica-lined aperture going right through the stonework of the chapel. And in this light box there is a red crystal of some kind. We're not sure, nobody actually knows what this crystal is. All I know is it's red, and twice a year the rising sun will strike this and it throws a beam of red light into the chapel, an orb of red light into the chapel. When I heard about this, the hair stood up in the back of my neck. It's another example, synchronicity just dumping, just landing on me. My friend, you're looking for the information, here it is. Now that happened twice within a fortnight, and even when I say that to you now, the hair is rising in the back of my neck, because it was such a powerful wow. It was the real wow moment, you know. They now believe something was hung up in the roof of the chapel and designed to be illuminated by this spot of red light that comes in twice a year. Is this the source of Marcel's red light that is used to illuminate these keys? Is this the source of the other source for activating the doorway, along with sound? Because sound and light are both ends of the electromagnetic frequency, if you will, so it's all part of the electromagnetic frequency. Maybe just an added complication to the lock to make it that more difficult to open. It certainly seems to be one of the possibilities to opening this doorway or this portal on demand. The keys are they're almost like stone slide rules, if I can put it that way. There's an outer and an inner, which is made to slide up and down, you know, so that they can be made to highlight different parts of the key. And what the gentleman did was he drew what he thought these keys looked like. He doused each drawing in turn until he got a positive response, and he believes that this is what the key looks like. We now have a situation where we know there's a portal in the chapel. We know that it can be partially operated by using an augmented force, so it is sensitive to sound. We also know that there is a source of red light in the chapel now. We also know that, according to the French gentleman who lives in America, that there are 4 keys. Well, there are 2 keys and 2 boxes containing, he just said, documents. It couldn't be more specific than that, artifacts of some kind, but documents, he thinks, hidden in the chapel. So there are 4 additional hiding places in the chapel for more information. I know from personal experience now that there is something very special in that chapel. I also believe that the chapel was built to a specific size. I also think that the decorations are not there just because they're pretty. I think they're there to tune the chapel to a specific purpose. And I think that is the secret of Roslyn Chapel, that opens a gateway to another world. The only information we have relevant to the Roslyn portal is that there is a Templar knight by the name of Spencer, I'm told, who stands guard over this portal. The medium who thought that there is a knight called Spencer guarding this doorway. And I might add that this was about in 2006 before he actually got involved in this. He had never been present in the chapel either in 1998 or in 2005. When I sent him an image of the St Matthew altar, I didn't tell him what it was or where it came from. Although anyone who was familiar with Roslyn Chapel would recognise the engraved Sinclair cross for what it was. But I'm taking the guy at his word that he knew nothing about Roslyn Chapel. All I did was send him a JPEG of this image and say, what do we have here? And what he sent me back put the hair up on the back of my neck. What he said was, this is a doorway to another world, it's guarded, and what is on the other side of there is knowledge. Gnosis. But I think Sir William Sinclair and the people assisting him may have put something there, hidden in every possible sense from whatever was trying to get at it. They've put it completely beyond man's reach, utterly and completely beyond man's reach. They've put it into another reality, into another time, and into another dimension somewhere. What this is, what is there, I have no idea. I don't know. I have not a clue. I don't know. But I'd certainly like to find out. What I've come to realise, now I'm no quantum physicist, I don't pretend to be one, I don't even pretend to have any working knowledge of physics, but on the other hand you don't need to know how a TV works to switch it on. What I do is I've taken their conclusions and looked at their conclusions. Now the quantum world bears no relation to the Newtonian world, but unfortunately science, which has its basis in Newtonian science, which has served mankind for centuries perfectly well and works very well indeed. But the cosmos and the universe is not a machine. You can't take it, disassemble it, put it back together again and sort of start it going again and hope for the best. It doesn't work that way. Now down in the quantum world you have quantum entanglement, you have all sorts of stuff going on down there. You have two photons that can be separated. You can take one to one end of the galaxy, one to the other, affect one and you affect the other instantaneously, bang bang. And sometimes you don't have to affect the one, all you got to do is think about it and the effect appears on another one as well. So something is happening down at the subatomic level over which we have no control. The steady state universe implies that everything that was here at the beginning is still there, and the air I am breathing now is the same air that existed when the universe came into creation, and it has always been there, it always will be there. And the dust that settles on the furniture around us is the dust from the bones of the very, very first, if you like, progenitors of mankind. Nothing leaves the universe, nothing comes out of it. That's one way of looking at this. So in that sense, we are part of the cosmos, yes, it is part of us, we are part of it. So there is no logical reason that at some level we should not be able to communicate with it. On the other hand, there is the concept brought up and thought up by a Jesuit, I might add, called the Maitre, who came up with the concept of the Big Bang. That the universe started from a singularity, infinitely small. Now, the concept of absolute nothing, I've struggled to get my head around this. It's very difficult, because when you talk about absolute nothing, even the space that the universe expanded into was not there. There was nothing. Now, to contemplate a perfect nothing is not easy. I'm not saying it is, because to contemplate the idea of no space, of no time, is very, very difficult. So this happened, bang, and within a nanosecond the universe was formed, or not, as the case may be. And it's still forming yet, it's still expanding. In Buddhist and Hindu teaching, they talk about God breathing. God has currently just breathed out, so logically at some point God must breathe back in again and the universe will collapse. But we are told that the universe is still expanding. Now, if that's the case, you would think that the universe would be of universal age, but it is not. Our sun, a star, is a sort of middle-aged sort of star. It's still got a few billion years life left in it, so life is not going to snuff out tomorrow. But on the other hand, there are dead stars out there. There are new stars out there. So, the universe is being born all the time. It's constantly renewing itself. From where? Planets and stars form from the accretion of matter out in the cosmos. Something gives something mass. That mass starts to accrete round about it, and it starts building and build and build and build until a star is born, a planet is born, and then through wastage, natural wastage, gradually they will die. The universe is entropic by nature. It is formed, it dies. We are entropic, I am entropic, the chair I'm sitting on is entropic, the camera that's filming this is entropic. It will disintegrate and die and become less organised, chaotic, and go back into absolute chaos again. So the universe, as propounded by the Big Bang Theory, is endlessly entropic, and that from somewhere new life is coming in to fill the gaps and keep the universe constantly being recreated. And this is what I believe is called zero-point energy. That from the zero-point field comes energy that is being replaced from somewhere else. Is this from another reality, from another dimension, or is it from sort of God particle? Is it the Higgs boson that's been looked for by the Large Hadron Collider? I have no idea. But all I can say is that the only one that works for me, if we are part of the cosmos and the cosmos is part of us, would have to be a steady state universe. And there are still schools of thought will argue strongly for that, just as there are schools of thought that will argue for the Big Bang Theory. Poltergeist phenomenon is electrodynamic in nature, in that the cold spots that are attributed to areas of, quote, hauntings and seem to manifest in either sounds or spontaneous movements. To me, for this to happen completely on its own as an isolated condition of spontaneous movement, my mind shouts no. Something's got to power that. There's got to be a translation device of some kind. Is it possible that thermal energy, or the lack of it, is being converted into kinetic energy to allow something to happen? What we don't know what the catalyst is, and is it controllable? But I've no doubt that there are people being paid billions of dollars a year in black projects are trying to do that right now, I would think. Once you start taking a long stick and poking into the abyss to see what's there, just be careful someone doesn't grab it and whack you right back again, because we don't know what we're messing about with in there. I know that I've been frightened to death a couple of times in investigations. Things have happened that I couldn't explain and I was terrified. But given an hour or an hour and a half, I sort of plucked up the courage to sort of open my eyes a little bit and sort of peek again and have another look at it. And tentatively, it's rather like feeling a bad tooth or a toothache with your tongue. You can't keep your teeth away from it, even though you know it's going to hurt you. And I think it's just, if you like, it's a mark of my passion for the subject that I cannot leave it alone. I keep going back, I keep trying to quantify it, I keep trying to rationalise it, and I keep trying to gather it and make sense of it. And hopefully, if I gather enough pieces of information, I'll be able to shuffle the pack and come out with some sort of logical explanation for it. I know there are organisations out there actively trying to destroy any meaningful work into paranormal research, mainly because corporate science is not interested in the paranormal because it doesn't turn a buck, quite frankly. It flies in the face of what is reasonable, it flies in the face of what can be made profitable. Therefore, people who should know different are quite happy to sing the mantra of corporate science and rubbish paranormal research if they possibly can. And I'm not going to say who they are because this is getting recorded. I think the ritualising of magic in the cult is unnecessary. I think magic works, I think it's valid, I think it's a technology. It's a technology we've either lost or stopped believing in. And I think more have stopped believing in rather than lost. All magic, in my opinion, has its roots in chaos magic, which is the desire and the ability to affect reality by wishing it to be. The only place, in my opinion again, in science where this works is in quantum physics, where the outcome of an experiment can be affected simply because someone doesn't believe it's going to work. It's so subtle, it's so ephemeral, that the slightest smidgen of doubt or hesitation can cause it to fail. Perfect quantum state can be destroyed by the introduction of a single photon, right? Something as intangible as a photon can destroy a complete experiment just because it doesn't fit, or it hit the wrong thing, or arrived at the wrong time, or something. If you pray A prayer is a spell. In effect, it's a spell. A priest or a minister or a rabbi is a magician. He is leading his flock, his coven, in prayer. In other words, he is attempting through the intermediary of a Godhead to alter reality. So in effect, a priest and or a minister is no different from a magician. The only difference is in context and intent. There's absolutely no difference. So I believe magic is viable. We've developed cynicism to such a degree that it cuts out what we see with our own eyes. We've started to believe people because they say they're right when they don't know if they're right or not. All they can do is produce the equations that say that I'm telling the truth, I'm proving, and there's the figures that say it. It doesn't mean they're right. All it means is they can prove a theory. There's a whole lexicon within the world of the occult that carries baggage. Spirits, ghosts, poltergeists, fairies, doesn't really matter, but each carries a whole train of baggage with it that means different things to different people. All we're talking about is an energy force, a life force. The reason it's been conceptualized as being coming from a Godhead, because it gives you something to kick when things go wrong. I honestly believe that once people start connecting with what they think and what they believe, once they start taking the more innocent point of view that their ancestors took, I think there is still hope for the survival of the human race. Because if they don't, we will poison ourselves off this planet eventually, I think. I think that our DNA, plant DNA, animal DNA, fish DNA, all our DNA carries much the same sort of coding. But it's the few percentage points of difference that makes we what we are, a fish what it is, a chimpanzee what it is, a pig what it is. So we are in existence purely by the luck of how our DNA was stranded and how it was put together. We can relate to everything around about us through our DNA because they share the same rootstock, the same components, the same particles exist within our DNA. So, in that sense, our ancestors carry the same DNA that we did. So, we are our ancestors. The only advantage we have is we think we're smarter. And I say think, okay, we can fly rocket ships, we can kill each other much more efficiently than we used to do. But just the same, we are our ancestors. The people in future generations, they are us as well. We are the same people, only we think we've got a bit smarter, but perhaps dumbing down for the future generations might be their very salvation.